So my name is Meagan Savage, and I'm one of the career coaches in the College of Arts and Sciences. And specifically regarding graduate school, what we're here to do is really help students explore that option, consider, is graduate school right for you based on what your career goals are? How can you identify graduate programs that are really interesting to you? Like, what are your resources for that? We talk them through what it typically takes to apply to grad school, like what application materials you need, what kind of timeline is usually in place for that. And then we help them also review their materials when they're prepared. So an academic resume, personal statement, most likely are the key components. We can help them identify who's going to write your letters of recommendation, how can you ask for those, and really help them address any other questions or concerns that they have about the graduate school process and point them toward the most appropriate resources.
And my name is Kristen Aldrich. I'm also a career coach in the College of Arts and Sciences. And not only do we help with kind of making sure you understand the grad school process from kind of start to finish, no matter where you're at, but also kind of help you think about like alternative options in case you're so grad school minded. We want to make sure you always have that parallel plan going at the same time. And as well, if you aren't thinking about going to grad school right away and you might want to take a year or two off, also kind of helping you think about some of those short-term options, whether that's a gap year, something that's a little bit more temporary, virtual work, remote work, whatever that might be, kind of letting you know kind of all the ins and outs if this is definitely a future goal for you, whether it's now or later.
And I would add actually one more thing on that note as well. Also helping students think about what it takes to be competitive for graduate school. So if they come to us early, maybe sophomore year, thinking about graduate school, like, okay, well, what are steps that you could and should be taking now in order to meet that goal by the time you graduate? Or if alternatively, they haven't had a lot of time to do things, or they just haven't, taken advantage of a lot of opportunities since they've been at the university, how can they use those kind of gap year experiences that Kristen was talking about in a really meaningful way to help them be more competitive for graduate school in a few years.
So typically whenever I get a student who's coming in and telling me that they want to go to grad school, sometimes they'll have an idea in mind of what programs they're looking at or what they want to further their education on. And sometimes they don't. So sometimes it's a conversation about, well, what do you want to go to grad school for? Where are you hoping to maybe have more expertise or more in-depth knowledge of? Because so many arts and sciences degrees or majors are so broad, going and doing something in the workforce that's really specific that maybe you took a couple of classes in, sometimes requires you to have an advanced degree to be eligible for those types of opportunities, right? If you think a little bit about psychology and a lot of students who want to become counselors or psychologists, psychiatrists, you do have to go on to an advanced degree to be able to do those things. You have to have kind of an idea in mind. So if you do have an idea in mind, it's still like, well, where do I look? There's so many different schools out there. So I always say start with your faculty members. These are people that you probably have been working with your research opportunities so far. You maybe got inspired by one of them by taking a class on that subject area. These are folks who love working with students. They love the discipline that they're teaching in, and they've been through the process themselves in some fashion, right? They have colleagues all across the United States, some even internationally, that they can get you connected and get you ideas started, whether that is at a master's level, that's at a PhD level, whatever it might be, to kind of help you understand and kind of paint that picture a little bit more clearly, just to give you some recommendations. So much of what the grad school process is so much different than what the undergrad experience of applying is. Lots of times you're applying for a very specific program, or you're applying to work with a very specific faculty member to further research in a specific area or field. So it's almost like you have to be really targeted with your search. So I always say start with your faculty members.
I totally agree. I think faculty members are the best place to start, at least. Additionally, there are several websites that have listings, very broad websites, things like US News and World Report, Princeton Review. These are very common websites to use when looking for graduate schools, but more specifically, looking into professional associations that are connected to your major, your area of study, or maybe your future profession that you really want to join in that profession. There's tons of professional associations, and a lot of times they have some really good recommendations for graduate programs. I would also recommend in this process to make sure that graduate school is necessary or appropriate for your long-term career goals. A lot of times what I find with international students is that they want to stay in the States and are maybe intimidated by the process of getting a job, because of course, I mean, there's a lot of different obstacles. I definitely feel empathetic toward a lot of their concerns. But if they're just going to grad school because they want to extend their stay and it's not as connected to their long-term career goals, I think they're going to have a harder time positioning themselves as a really competitive candidate, or even identifying programs that are exciting to them. Because if you're not, curious and really sort of invested in the program or your field of study for graduate school, it's going to be extremely difficult because it's such a challenging experience.
Now, I'll add one more part of context. I think sometimes they throw out words that seem really obvious in our everyday language. Like, I don't know if I knew what a professional association was when I was a student. So let's give a little bit of background on that. I think Meagan and I are just like, oh, professional association is easy. So if you don't know what a professional association is, I like to think about it as, it's weirdly enough like a grown-up RSO in a way. Like if you think about you being in your anthropology group here on campus, you're being around other like-minded students who are really interested in this area. But professional associations is just that times like 100, right? You get to start working with professionals in your field of study. Sometimes you're working in publications together. You're maybe going to conferences together, things like that. So there's a lot to what those professional associations do. Some are really great and some of them aren't. So it's having to maybe filter some of those down. If you aren't really sure where to start, you can always start with your career services professionals like myself or Meagan, or you can straight up Google professional associations in geography, professional associations in, the humanities, right? So, I mean, you can always kind of dig for some of those things and figure out what they are. And those are, like Meagan said, kind of with a wealth of information, especially around furthering your degree or even having student resources for you on those websites as well to get you connected.
I think, if a student is really struggling, feeling uncomfortable with their English language skills, they could start their draft in their native language, in their home language. If it helps them generate ideas for what to say and how to present themselves, I think if that is going to get the ball rolling for them, I think that's perfectly fine. And then they can work on translating, and they can even ask for help of, this is what I wrote in Mandarin, and kind of explain it to me, and then I can kind of suggest how they might word that in English. If they're going to start feeling a little bit more confident about how they can express themselves if they're using their own language, then it's not just me. They can see the Writing Center, they can see the ESL Support Lab. There are lots of different places on campus where they could ask for that kind of help, even with just like a peer, an English speaking, someone whose native language is English, a friend that they have. So that would be one recommendation for some place to start. And then my other recommendation isn't so magical, but it is simply just to get started. I think the really hard part is looking at a blank Word document and feeling like you have absolutely nothing to say. And unfortunately, a lot of schools don't give a lot of context for what is expected from a personal statement, but you can just assume a lot of that is going to be like, why am I applying for this program? So start there. Why are you applying for this program? Why do you feel like you're qualified for this program? What are you hoping to gain from this program? How is it going to support your long-term goals? If you just take those 3 key questions and start typing it, and it doesn't have to be pretty or perfect or even in English, to just start generating ideas, then you can, take it from there and, go through several rounds of revisions. And I promise even domestic students whose first language is English go through tons and tons of revisions for their personal statement. That's a really normal process. And so for international students, they shouldn't feel discouraged that they will have a similar process.
Yeah, to echo that, just getting started is the hardest part. I think you do get really intimidated by like already starting to make edits from your first draft. It's like, just word vomit it out, right? Like just start putting things down. Nobody's looking at that draft right now. And, do start thinking about some of those reflective questions of like, why do I want to go to graduate school? What intrigues me about these programs? What kinds of things have I done so far to get me ready for these types of graduate programs? Because when I have looked at grad schools who provide information on these personal statements, those are often the questions that are being asked, because that's what they need to evaluate. They need to say, why are you intending on furthering your degree? What interest areas do you have to see if we can match you up with some faculty members, or different kind of field experiences, internships. How have you prepared and how are you ready for this next step? Because a lot of it is almost a persuasive essay, if you think about it. You're really trying to tell somebody else why you think that you'd be a good investment for them, to bring you in for a couple of years or for a good number of years, depending on how long you want to go to graduate school. And more importantly, you don't have to do it all by yourself, right? So start writing some things down, charting things out, even if it's just a rough outline of like, okay, in my first paragraph, I want to talk about this. The second one, I might talk about this, and just get it down. And just as Meagan said, like, we're here to help you throughout the process of kind of making sure you go from one draft to the second draft to the third. We really help a lot with more or less like the flow, the structure, making sure that you're having the right kind of tone with this kind of document. The Writing Center is really there to also make sure that your language is up to speed, making sure your intentions are coming across correctly in your writing. But the ESL lab, I think a lot of students just don't know about that additional opportunity to, they primarily work with people who English is not their first language, right? So they know exactly how to maybe help give you a different perspective on how that might come across in your native language versus English as well. So definitely feel free to use them. And sometimes it's just reading your personal statement out loud to somebody else to see how it's coming across and understanding how you might be perceived in the process overall. And lastly, use this guide, this Pursuing Grad School guide. So I know we're doing this all virtually right now, but there's plenty of resources to kind of help you get started on answering some of those questions as well. But yeah, hardest part is just getting that first couple lines written out. And if you don't know, I'd get a little bit curious about whether you should go to graduate school if you can't even answer the basic questions. I would say don't write one personal statement for every school, because they need to be individualized. So you hear that a lot with any kind of application that you're submitting, is it should be really tailored for that opportunity. Now, that goes without, it's hard to want to fully rewrite a statement. You can have common pieces, like your story doesn't change, your experiences aren't changing, but your intentions for going to that program or working with a specific faculty member or two needs to be really focused and, like I said, individual to them, right? So that way they feel a little bit more catered to, a little bit more like, sought after as well. So I would say the biggest don't submit the same statement for every school, because it will get you into trouble.
I think a do for me is get multiple perspectives on your personal statement. So don't just bring it to career coaches or just the Writing Center or all of that. I think especially getting the input of faculty, especially those faculty who are writing your letters of recommendation. Hopefully if they've said yes to writing you a letter of recommendation, that also means they believe in you as an applicant and want you to be successful. Faculty have reviewed lots of graduate school applications because we have grad students here. So that's a big part of that process. They will review those so they can give you some really good input. Additionally, the international students I mostly see are in very technical majors. And sometimes the language that they use in their application materials and their personal statement talk about their experience in very technical research or very technical internships, and that vocabulary is over my head. Like, I cannot tell you what any of that meant. I can tell you that your sentence structure is good, or like the flow between paragraphs is good, and you're addressing all of the things that you should address. I can give you all of that. But definitely run it by a faculty member who's going to be able to say, oh, you should expand upon this very technical detail, or that's actually not the right term for that, or what, like, these are not things I'll be able to catch. So getting multiple perspectives will only help your personal statement get stronger, but also know when to stop, because you will always get feedback on that. You should change this, you should change this, you should change this. I think I reviewed one student's like maybe 11 times, and like, stop. It is what it is. Just know when you are finished with it, because it'll never be absolutely perfect, but getting the multiple perspectives is really helpful.
I have something maybe to piggyback off that. So do be authentic and also be descriptive in your personal statement, right? This is them getting to know you for the first time. If you haven't maybe met with a faculty member through other means or other experiences, whether it's like a conference or you got referred or something like that. So this is a chance for you to really give a good formal introduction to yourself. You want that to be representative of you, whether it's, I got started with thinking about grad school from a young age, and you kind of let that start off your story. And really owning the awesome things that you've been able to do to get to this point. I think a lot of times people have a hard time bragging about themselves or giving themselves credit. And that means they're being too concise with their language. You should really be a little bit more thorough. There's some boundaries to that. We don't need to overdo it, because there's usually page limits to think about and word limits. But again, like, you want to make sure this is representing you well. And I think that's the hardest part too with the review piece is, they're tearing apart my work and my experience, but everyone has their own opinions. And at the end of the day, it is your document. It's representing you, and what do you want it to say about you? And kind of taking that review with a peace of mind, but also a grain of salt as well. So overall, be authentic, be descriptive, but represent you as best as you can in a couple of pages and a couple of paragraphs as best as you can. So do all those things.
Build off of that. I have a don't.
Sweet.
Be authentic, yes, absolutely. But don't overshare. Like, don't get hung up on a lot of personal details and personal storytelling that is not relevant to your long-term goals. That's not relevant to the program. There are a lot of different ways, like your personal identity and how it's shaped, or its personal experiences that you've had have led you to having these career goals for yourself, have led you to wanting to go to grad school. And that's all great. Like, include all of that. But do you need to tell about your background with your twin sister and your dog that time you were like collecting seashells or whatever? Like, no. So I think it's easy to be really stumped about, like, what do I share? And then understanding where the boundary is for what I don't share. And so I would much rather get a draft of a personal statement with overshare, so then we can cut it down, than like really try to pull out the details. So if you're drafting something, just write it, and we can work together to figure out, okay, what are the relevant details and what can be cut for the sake of time and space.
I would say lastly, do pay attention to what each school is asking for with a personal statement. We kind of alluded to this, that some programs can be giving you no kind of prompt at all, but other ones are very specific. So whether that is answering certain types of questions, submitting it in a certain file type, having a certain number of words or a number of pages, if you can't follow directions or instructions, that's not a good sign to them. And that also shows it's a little bit sloppy. And that means you might have different versions of your personal statements from 500 words to 2 pages. And like Meagan said, get it started. We can always figure out how to adapt it for each program, because no grad school application process to me is exactly the same. It's always a little bit different in what they want. So that's why we really want to make sure that you have something at least to start with, and then you start tailoring it, just like you do with your resume or any other kind of application materials. First, your personal statement is one part. So is your what we call an academic resume. These should not be the same document. They should not be too repetitive of each other. They should complement each other, right? These are parts of your application, just like your letters of recommendation. You want them to see you as a whole applicant. You know, your personal statement really gets you to have that narrative. You can really share and go in a little bit more depth. Your resume is really there to show your qualifications and all the things you've been able to contribute to so far. So when you're preparing this one statement or this one document, think about how it plays well with your other parts of your application. If you need to address that your GPA wasn't super great, or if you didn't get a high GRE score and you need to address that in your personal statement, you have to figure out a way to put that in so it's a part of your overall application. So I would definitely think about that. And then overall, the grad school process is not something to take lightly. It's not something I feel like you want to just jump into because you have no other plans. Or it's like, again, what we've talked about a lot, I have no idea what I want to do, so I'm going to go to grad school. Never going to be a good sign for you to start that process if you don't have good, well intentions there. And you can eventually find a way to that part. But if you don't have the right motivation, you might be spending a couple of years in a program that you're not even interested or motivated by, and you eventually will be done with that grad program. You still have to figure out what you're going to do, right? So part of it is, don't delay your problem with grad school, but use your grad school intentions a little bit more clearly. So I think those are usually my biggest pieces, especially with international students, especially with arts and sciences students who sometimes can feel like they don't know what their other options may be. And are really motivated by school and learning.
I think one final tip I have for personal statements is, and this I'm stealing from Kristen, which I thought was a brilliant idea, read it out loud. Read it out loud to yourself, read it out loud to a friend, and then I will have you read it out loud to me, and see how it feels. Because when you're reading silently to yourself, it's a lot easier to hear yourself the way you maybe want to hear it. Or, now you've been working on it so long, you hear it one way, but when it's read out loud, it feels very different. So I think that's one tip. And then you can sort of highlight parts that sound awkward to you and say, oh, I want to ask about this, or I want to work on this part, so that our meeting, we can dive in and get your more specific questions answered and work on the tricky parts together. For graduate school in general, I think it's definitely worth your time to build relationships with faculty members. I think when I have just anecdotally when I've met with international students before who are interested in graduate school, we meet very late. So they're already seniors, and they don't have faculty connections on campus, unfortunately. And so the people who end up writing their letters of recommendation don't have a lot of specific things to say about them, or, can't really speak super highly of them. Oh, they got to be in my class. They don't have a relationship. So spending time with your faculty members in their office hours, asking questions about class material, getting connected to their research, basically just expressing an interest, building a relationship, is going to make your graduate school process much more smooth, because they will refer you to programs. You can pick their brains for programs, and then they will be very strong letter of recommendation writers. So if any international students are watching this and they're kind of early in their process, invest the time, because it's just going to go a lot easier for you.
And I'll try and back in on the part you were talking about, which is the reading out loud. Mm-hmm. I specifically do that with every student, whether you're an international student or not, because I get students who feel like they're very strong writers. And then once I'm like, okay, let's read this. I actually have a student close their eyes. I'll read it to them out loud. So now you're the reviewer. Because usually when you're editing your personal statement, you're going line by line and you're not thinking about it from a holistic perspective. When somebody is reading this statement, they are reading it from top to bottom, left to right, right? So you have to make sure that you get through the whole document. And what's nice is that most of the time you catch what you want to fix. That it makes my job actually a little bit easier to say, oh, that sentence didn't make sense, or I wish I could switch these around. So you're catching those things that you already want to improve upon as well. And it's literally that simple, as just changing your mind away from it and being in a different seat of the reviewer as well. And you can do that. I usually say have somebody else read it to you. Don't read it out loud yourself. So then that way you can hear it all the way through and kind of see how it flows, and if it really, like I said, represents you well.
Plenty of domestic students have that same problem as well, or, that same concern. If you stay local to Lincoln, have coffee once a month. or like once a semester or whatever, especially if you're able to build a really good relationship, you consider that person like a mentor or even a friend of some kind. Take the initiative to just like go see them during their normal office hours, come back to campus. Obviously you're allowed to come back to campus anytime you want. If you're not local, drop an email and just say, oh, I have this great opportunity. I'm doing really well. I'm doing this cool job. Thank you so much for all of your help and support. And just keep, casual lines of communication open. And then, and you can even like, if you know that what your job is going to be a short-term opportunity, and OPT is short-term, and then you plan to go to graduate school, even before you graduate, you can just connect with any of your great faculty members and say, this is my plan for now. I'm doing this using my OPT for this experience, but then I hope to go to graduate school, and I really hope that I can reach back out for a letter of recommendation. Put it on their radar early, and then keep those lines of communication open. Maybe connect with them on LinkedIn. If your faculty member has a LinkedIn, that could be a great way to remain connected. Or like I said, just visiting or sending an email occasionally. And so then when that request comes through eventually, they won't be taken off guard, or they won't be like, who is this? It'll be a lot easier and feel less weird.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's just maintaining that connection, and however you're able to do that. And even if it's like you're starting now and it might feel a little bit late, you might say, I'm getting ready to graduate in May. I got a little bit late on the graduate school process, so I am going to go work for a couple of years. Here's what my plan is. But I'd really love to talk with you more about graduate school. I'm someone who's still really interested in this. But don't start putting the bug in about letter of recommendation too early, because they might already say, I don't know you very well.
Sure.
Sometimes. Yeah, I would say I think I get a lot of that from students who are really late in the process, is they don't know how much faculty have on their plate. To say, yeah, write this page of letter of recommendation or answer this email prompt. And that's a lot to ask, right? And always ask for a positive reference or letter of recommendation, which I know seems really redundant, like duh. Of course you want them to write something positive, but having that context is good. But yeah, I think it can be very intimidating. It can be a little bit scary to do that, but the more you get to know somebody and they get to know you, the less scary it is, right? And you're only going to do that by keeping in communication or keeping in contact. So I like the suggestions Meagan gave around, getting coffee, having a Zoom meeting like this, right? If you have the technology for that, and trying to just foster any kind of relationship you can with them. Faculty members want to contribute more to their field. They want to bring more people in to their areas, even if it seems like it's something that could be up in the air in a few years, right? So I think it's just one of those things that you have to help them understand what the end goal is, but not to give them the end goal right away, and kind of just hope from there, right? And, if they're studying, if you want to do something that they're already really knowledgeable in, of course, they're going to want to sit and geek out and talk with you about it, right? So who doesn't want to talk about what they do in their job, and should be pretty receptive about it. And if they're not, they'll be very transparent with you about like, I'm actually going to be on sabbatical, or I'm going to be out. I don't know if I can take this on. And they should be pretty aware, but also be persistent with these faculty. Feel free to email them again if you feel like you're not getting a good response, or give them a little bit of time.